Ben Askren just broke his silence. And it's not the kind of update anyone expected. The former Olympian and UFC fighter, known for his quirky sense of humor and brutal honesty, finally opened up about the health scare that nearly ended his life. A shocking ordeal involving memory loss, a 50-pound weight drop, and being brought back to life 4 times. In his own words, Askren called it like a movie. But it wasn't just his comeback that shook fans. It was what he said afterward that changed everything. In this video, we're diving into what really happened to Ben Askren, the emotional reactions from fighters like Daniel Cormier and Michael Chandler, Charles Oliveira's post-knockout trauma, and what Jon Jones, Francis Ngannou, and Ilia Topuria are all doing next. It's a chaotic time in MMA, and today we're breaking it all down. Ben Askren's voice cracked as he finally gave fans an update. But it wasn't some routine health check-in. What he described sounded more like a near-death horror story than a post-fight recovery. In his first real public statement since the incident, Askren revealed something haunting. He has zero memory from May 28th to July 2nd. Nothing, not a flash. He said the only way he's even aware of what happened is because he read through his wife's personal journal entry, the only record of the darkest month of his life. What that journal detailed was staggering. Askren's body had completely shut down. He suffered 4 separate cardiac arrests. 4 times, his heart stopped for nearly 20 seconds. "That's not ideal," he said, with his trademark deadpan delivery. But there was no hiding the emotional weight behind the words. This wasn't just a medical scare. It was a battle for survival. And it all ended with an emergency double lung transplant, a procedure most people don't live to tell the tale from. He described waking up 50 pounds lighter. At just 147 pounds, he hadn't seen that number on the scale since he was a teenager. Askren, who was always stocky and strong in his wrestling days, now looked emaciated. And yet he said he was grateful. Grateful to be alive. Grateful to have survived something most don't. And especially grateful for the overwhelming wave of support from people around the world. "It felt like I got to hear my own funeral," he said, without flinching. That one sentence told the entire story. Ben Askren, the funky fighter who once trash-talked his way into UFC superstardom, had now been humbled by something no man can fight, death. And yet, he made it back. He doesn't remember the worst of it, but he remembers how it felt to wake up and realize the world hadn't forgotten him. While Ben Askren lay unconscious, clinging to life, the MMA world responded like never before. His name began trending, not because of a flashy knockout or controversial tweet, but because the community knew something was very wrong. And for the first time in a long time, the entire fight world stood together. Daniel Cormier, his longtime friend and rival, tweeted, "We love you, buddy. You're a fighter. It's why you're fighting back. Thank God we still have you." That line alone brought chills to anyone who had followed their careers. Michael Chandler went even deeper. He didn't just offer support, he gave credit. "You've always been the toughest man I've ever been around in my entire life," he wrote. "I wouldn't be where I am today without your belief in me." Chandler wasn't just saying nice things. He was pointing to the foundation Askren had laid for so many in the wrestling and MMA world. Henry Cejudo chimed in too, writing, "Glad you made it through, bro. Really puts life into perspective for all of us." Askren's comeback isn't just about health, it's about legacy. For years, fans mocked him for the brutal Jorge Masvidal knockout, reducing him to a meme. But that's not how fighters remember Ben Askren. They remember the Olympic wrestler, the Bellator champion, the guy who believed in grappling when everyone else called it boring. They remember the pioneer. In his recovery video, Askren admitted that this experience has changed his entire outlook. He talked about giving back, about how the love he felt made him realize his worth outside of wins and losses. And perhaps most poignantly, he mentioned how his community, his family, his fans, his former opponents rallied around his family in a way that he could never repay. He called it overwhelming. He called it beautiful. And for once, the loudest man in MMA was just thankful. Just as Ben Askren was waking up from a month-long battle with death, Charles Oliveira was coming to from a different kind of nightmare. After suffering a devastating knockout loss to Ilia Topuria, Oliveira admitted something he had never said before in his career. He didn't remember the KO, not a second of it, the fight, the moment his body shut down, the seconds he lay flat on the mat, gone. When he woke up, he had to ask his team where he was, what happened, and if he had lost. This wasn't just another another loss for Oliveira. It was a moment that shook the entire fan base. Here was a man who had gone through absolute wars with Justin Gaethje, Michael Chandler, and Dustin Poirier, a man who had clawed his way from early career losses to become a beloved champion, admitting that for the first time ever, his brain simply shut off. In a post-fight interview, Oliveira said, "I would change everything. I didn't do any of what I trained for. Everything we worked on, none of it happened in the fight." That kind of confession hits hard. Fighters are often too proud to admit when something goes wrong, but Oliveira didn't hide. He stood in the aftermath of the wreckage and owned it. And for many fans, that made the knockout even more tragic, because it wasn't just a physical failure. It was mental, emotional, existential. You could hear the self-doubt creeping into his voice, the shock of realizing he'd never been knocked out like that before. The scarier question fans began asking was this: can you ever be the same again after something like that? In MMA, a knockout isn't just a loss, it's a trauma. And while some fighters bounce back, others, many others, never recover. As Oliveira begins his climb back, there's a lingering tension in the air. Will Do Bronx be able to rediscover the fire that made him a champion? Or will Topuria's punch echo far beyond that single night? When Charles Oliveira fell, fans worried if he'd ever be the same. But then came Alexander Volkanovski, a fighter already carrying 2 brutal knockouts in a row. First from Islam Makhachev, then Ilia Topuria, and somehow he came back swinging. And not just swinging, winning. Against all odds, Volkanovski reclaimed his UFC title. To fans, it was inspirational. To his family, it was terrifying. Because while the world cheered, the people closest to him were holding their breath. In a Raw interview with Demetrius Johnson, Volkanovski finally pulled back the curtain. After that crushing knockout by Makhachev, he admitted he should have taken a long break. His voice softened as he explained how his wife and family didn't want him to return. "They all wanted me to stop straight after the fight," he confessed. His wife didn't voice her fears before the bout because, as Volkanovski put it, that's probably not a good conversation to have going into a fight camp. But afterward, they told him the truth. They wanted him to retire, right there in the octagon. Put the gloves down, walk away. For them, it wasn't about legacy or belts anymore. It was about life, about the man who came home to them after every war, with a smile hiding trauma and concussions. They watched him fall unconscious on live TV. They heard the silence in the arena as he didn't get back up. Volkanovski's choice to return may have inspired fans, but it put a crack in his family's peace. And as he stood tall again, holding the belt, their worry only grew louder. Because when you've already proven you're the best, every new fight isn't just another test, it's another spin of the wheel. And eventually, one of those spins could take everything. For Volkanovski, the roar of the crowd now comes with a whisper behind the scenes: "Please, let this be the last one." When Ilia Topuria knocked out Charles Oliveira, it wasn't just a win, it was a warning. Topuria's rise hasn't been gradual, it's been explosive. Every opponent that stood across from him has either been dominated or erased. And as fans began to realize just how dangerous he is, so did the rest of the roster. Fighters who once mocked him now speak his name with hesitation, because he's not just a knockout artist, he's a dismantler. Topuria himself says, "We haven't even seen his full potential yet, that the scariest version of him hasn't stepped into the cage." And as his momentum snowballs, the UFC is struggling to find worthy challengers. Arman Tsarukyan has been floated as a potential next test, but even that matchup feels like a long shot, because right now, Topuria is dismantling people with terrifying ease. Some fans joke that Charles Jourdain figured out the secret, that he cracked the code after years of observation. You start the fight low, you time the jab, and you move, they say. But jokes aside, very few fighters actually believe they can stand in front of Ilia for long. The only ones who dare are coming from outside the UFC, like Usman Nurmagomedov. Some fans believe Usman has the tools to stop Topuria, but others think he's walking into a trap. Usman barely edged out Paul Hughes. Topuria would mangle him, one fan wrote. Another added, "If you put him in with Ilia now, you're sending him to the hospital." And yet, Khabib Nurmagomedov had big plans. He once said Usman was the future future of the lightweight division, that he would take the throne when Islam Makhachev retired. But with Topuria in control now, that future suddenly looks very uncertain. Because when you watch Ilia fight, you get the sense that we're witnessing the start of a reign, not just a streak. And unlike others before him, this king has no intention of ever giving up the crown. Jon Jones is back in the headlines again. Not for a fight, not for an arrest, but for something even more chaotic: uncertainty. After over a year of silence, Jones posted that he had re-entered the USADA testing pool. Just a vague tweet. No date, no opponent, no real plan. And while fans lit up with excitement, Daniel Cormier saw right through it. "This dude just loves attention," Cormier said bluntly. "He's dangling his status over our heads. I don't care if Jon Jones ever fights again." That's a bold statement from someone who once spent years chasing Jones's shadow, but it reflects how much the community has changed its tone. Because now, every time Jones says he's coming back, it feels more like a tease than a promise. Cormier's frustration was clear. He even accused Jones of playing with fans' emotions, keeping his name relevant without doing the work. And for many, it struck a nerve. Because Jones once stood at the peak of the sport, undeniably the greatest. But now, he's more myth than man, a ghost of what he used to be. Every time he surfaces, people ask the same question: is it real this time? Behind the scenes, there's still tension over the fact that Jones refused to fight Tom Aspinall. When asked, he said it just didn't mean enough to him. That comment didn't sit well. Fans wanted that showdown. The UFC wanted it, but Jones didn't. And with every delay, the gap between what he once was and what he is now grows wider. Yes, he's back in the gym. Yes, he looks strong, but it no longer feels like the return of a king. It feels like a final act, one that may never be performed. And even if he does come back, it may be too late. Because the sport moved on. The fans found new heroes. And Jon Jones, for all his brilliance, might have waited just a little too long to reclaim his throne. Ben Askren isn't just a former fighter. He's a survivor. And not in the metaphorical, cliché kind of way. He literally died 4 times. In his first public update since his medical emergency, Askren sat down with glassy eyes and a shaky breath and told the world what had happened. The date was May 28th. He doesn't remember anything from that day until July 2nd. That's over a month of complete memory loss. Gone. Like a blank page in the story of his life. It all began with a rare lung condition. He needed a double lung transplant, a procedure so risky most people don't make it through. Askren flatlined 4 separate times, 20-second intervals where his heart stopped completely. As he told the story, you could see the disbelief in his face, like he couldn't believe he was even alive to tell it. "It's like a movie," he said, holding back emotion. "I just read my wife's journal. That's how I know what happened." He had to piece together his own trauma like a detective reading someone else's case file. And the impact? Devastating. He lost 50 pounds in just 45 days, dropping to 147 pounds, a weight he hadn't been since he was 15 years old. His body was withering, but his spirit wasn't gone. Askren said the outpouring of love from the wrestling community kept him going. It was, in his words, like being at your own funeral, but you get to hear what people say. The tributes, the memories, the gratitude from fans and fellow athletes. It all came pouring in. Daniel Cormier, Ariel Helwani, Michael Chandler all spoke out with powerful words, celebrating a man who gave so much to the sport and nearly lost everything in return. Now, he's learning how to walk again, how to breathe again, how to be human again. But there's a darkness underneath his story, because even though he lived, he came inches from death. And as he said goodbye in the video, one thing was clear. Ben Askren might never fight again, but he just survived the toughest opponent he's ever faced, his own body. Once hailed as the most terrifying heavyweight alive, Francis Ngannou is now a man trying to put the pieces back together. Known for power that could snap skulls and a rise from poverty that became legend, Ngannou was the embodiment of perseverance. But recently, tragedy struck in a way no one saw coming. A car accident involving Ngannou left a young girl dead, and the silence that followed was deafening. For weeks, fans didn't know if Francis would ever show his face again. Would he walk away from the spotlight? Was the guilt too heavy? Was his fighting spirit extinguished? It wasn't just a career crisis, it was a spiritual one. And when footage surfaced of him training again, it wasn't triumph that people felt, it was heartbreak. The video showed him with chains around his neck, pushing through brutal sets, as if trying to punish himself into redemption. The caption read, "Getting ready for what's to come." But what's coming isn't just a return to the ring. It's the weight of that accident, the whispers that won't go away, the unanswered questions, the emotional wreckage. And beneath the surface, there's a quiet desperation in his movements, like a man fighting his own ghosts. Francis has always been a figure of power, but now he feels more like a tragic hero, the kind whose strength couldn't protect him from fate. And even as he trains with Fury, the world sees something else. A man running from grief. And the question now is, can he ever truly come back from it? Because no matter how strong he looks, no matter how hard he hits a bag, that little girl's name will always be there, in the silence between rounds, in the eyes of the fans who once saw him as invincible. And for a fighter who built his legacy on heart, that might be the most devastating loss of all. In a sport built on legends, the question always becomes, who's next? With Jon Jones aging, Francis scarred by tragedy, and champions like Oliveira and Volkanovski showing cracks, the next wave is here. Ilia Topuria, Islam Makhachev, Usman Nurmagomedov. They are the names at the center of the new MMA war. But even they aren't safe from the UFC's vicious cycle. Khabib once had a vision. He believed Islam would reign until Usman took over. It was clean. It was predictable. But the UFC isn't built for clean handoffs. It's built for chaos. And Ilia Topuria is the chaos no one planned for. He threatens everything: plans, dynasties, balance. Because if he beats Islam, if he moves up in weight and takes multiple belts, he doesn't just disrupt the lightweight division. He erases the legacy Khabib tried to build. Some fans already believe Topuria could replace one of MMA's Mount Rushmore greats, Jon Jones, GSP, Demetrius Johnson, or even Khabib himself. It's a bold claim, but not impossible. Because if he becomes a three-division champion, what then? Where do we place him in history? How do we explain his dominance? But there's another reality no one talks about. What happens if it all goes wrong? If Topuria takes too much damage? If Islam loses the belt and fades into obscurity? If Usman steps up too early and gets destroyed? We've seen it before, promising legacies shattered before they begin. And with every new champion comes a darker question: how long until they break? The UFC is a machine that feeds on greatness, then chews it up. And whether it's Askren on a hospital bed, Volkanovski questioning retirement, or Jon Jones playing with the idea of relevance, the truth is clear. No one stays on top, and every champion eventually becomes a memory. As we move into this new era, with new faces and new wars, one thing remains the same. The sport doesn't care who you are. It will take everything, and if you're not ready to give it all, it'll take it anyway. And maybe that's the scariest part about MMA. It doesn't have a retirement plan. It doesn't offer closure. It gives you lights, fame, cheers, but it takes your memories, your bones, your breath. Fighters walk into the cage thinking they'll leave on their own terms. Almost none of them do. For every rising star, there's an Askren gasping for air. For every dominant force like Ngannou, there's a tragedy lurking around the corner that no punch can stop, and the cycle keeps spinning. Young fighters dream of gold. Fans cheer for knockouts. Promoters line up pay-per-view posters. But in the shadows, behind the belts and the banners, truth waits. This sport breaks everyone eventually. Jon Jones may troll from the sidelines. Khabib may pray that his legacy survives. Volkanovski may smile through the trauma of being nearly separated from his children for good. But the real fight, it isn't for rankings or records. It's for your mind, your family, your soul. Ilia Topuria might be next, or Usman, or someone not even signed yet. But one day, they'll be sitting in a hospital bed too, wondering how it all slipped away. Because in this game, survival isn't about beating your opponent. It's about beating the ending that waits for all of them. When the lights go out, the crowd forgets, and all that's left is the bruises you can't see. So while the UFC builds its next champion, and we debate who deserves GOAT status, don't forget the real stories. The ones behind the belts. The ones that don't make headlines. Because those stories, they're the ones that hurt the most.